Hey, here we are with another episode of What is Metamodern Conversations. I'm Greg Dember, and my co-host is Linda Ciriello. And we run a website called whatismetamodern.com. And what we're doing here is the conversational component of the project. What we do is we talk with artists whose work seems metamodern to us, and or thinkers who think about artists whose work seems metamodern to us. Today's topic is Donald Glover / Childish Gambino, and our guest is Cam Ostrander.
Yeah, we're happy to have Cam here. I'm going to do a quick introduction here. Cam, you write for the Dissect Podcast, which is a show that examines contemporary albums, one album per season and one song per episode. And you worked on season 7, focused on Childish Gambino's transmedia world, which is called Because the Internet, which we'll be talking about quite a bit here. And you have a website called metamodерncam.com. Which is a multimedia exploration of its own of Donald Glover's world, focusing in tremendous detail on the metamodern perspective of identity and existentialism. And it's the place where you can find the most extensive metamodern study of Because the Internet out there, really. And you also teach high school English in Washington, D.C., and you're a writer. So welcome, Cam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, guys. This is very exciting.
So at one point you mentioned that an examination of metamodern concepts as they apply to the transmedia world of Because the Internet was sorely needed. And I know you've written a ton on it,
Yes.
and we are really excited to think about it with you as well. So let's see if we can contribute anything else to this conversation today. But first, we want to ask you to kind of encapsulate for us what Because the Internet, or BTI for short, what it is with all its branches and aspects. For me, it took some doing to actually wrap my brain around what it is, because it is a set of songs or an album, but it's not just that by any means. It's not just a thing or a product or a set of products. So give a whirl at encapsulating it, please.
Yes, absolutely. So because the internet, the phrase that I like to use is transmedia world, which basically just means lots of different forms of media, creating a world for us to explore. It was created in 2013, starting at the end of 2012 was when it was begun, when he started to make it. It includes an album, a script, multiple film aspects, and the script isn't really just a script. It's like an interactive online script, and there was performance art, there were exhibitions, there were live spaces, there was an app, there was music video, there were so many different components that I can never remember to name them all. But basically it was the polymath of Donald Glover just doing everything that he can do, and using every single tool in his arsenal, every really available method of communication to try and create a world for audiences to explore and live in. And that is because internet.
How did you get into this deep dive down the rabbit hole for Because the Internet, and how and when did you kind of get interested in the concept of metamodernism?
Right. Also, Donald Glover's kind of been my favorite artist since I was in high school. Downloading his one of his early mixtapes, Cul-de-sac, was the first thing I did when I got a computer of my own, and that then opened up the entire internet to me, and then through that the whole world. Because internet came out, I was 18, so was very important. It was the most important work at a very important time in my life. So I was always just interested, and I was very very engaged in the world as it was happening in real time. Then I got to college, I went through all my courses, and then when it came time for a senior thesis, I was like, well, what is the most important thing to me to talk about? It's because the internet. So I wanted to look at it. I wanted to like explore it in order to get my degree. And there were some cultural theory aspects that professors were suggesting to me, and none of the old stuff fit until I had a conversation with Dr. Paul Mulhauser. And basically he was like, there's this new thing that I saw like an article about metamodernism. I don't know, but like I saw an article, maybe you could just use that, like try and see if that helps at all. And once I read that, I was like, oh my God, because the internet is a perfect model, it is for this type of thinking, this like the episteme, is that how I say that word? Like that it totally fits this world that he's created. And I thought it was really applicable. And plus two, it allowed for a study of a multimedia world that was more than just writing a paper, which is why I created the website and created all the different forms of content, exploring it all.
Oh, okay. So the website itself was part of your senior project?
Yes. Yeah. So like you have to write a paper, but I was like, there's no way a paper does any justice to this. The paper is just one part of everything that I should make. So I made a website. And when I like presented it, I got real. So as I said, there were like exhibits. So like when I presented the material as I did to my school and at like a few academic conferences, actually, I like brought items and tried to make the presentation an exhibit as he had done. So for instance, in the story of this world, there's a character, the boy, he has a room. So they made that room and they did a performance in that room and they brought audiences in there. So I, having been a fan of this for years, had gotten some of the books that were in the boy's room, some of the artwork, and I brought that with me. And like, I tried to do everything that I could to like mirror the work in the exploration of it.
Ah, there's so many levels going on there, because I don't remember if you mentioned this one, but we had talked before about how the boys' bedroom was or is maybe a kind of installation somewhere.
Yes, it was. It was an installation.
And then you created an installation out of that concept.
Tried to do something that I could, but yeah.
So the album itself isn't even just a set of songs that go together. There's a story in it, right?
Right. It is a narrative.
Yeah.
It's structured into acts and scenes. And then that album also had parts of the album that weren't on the album. There was a secret track embedded in the code of the script.
Right.
There were 2 mixtapes that came afterwards that were conceptually part of the narrative in the album. So he was really trying to expand our ability to explore these things.
Could you give a little kind of overview of the story as you have absorbed it?
Yeah. So for a narrative for the work, right, just for the album itself and for like the script, which those kind of go hand in hand. And this is not to talk about Donald's own life and the ways he interwove his personal life into the work and how he acted that out in the performance art things going on through that time. So just for the album and the narrative, you have a character named the boy who is a young black wealthy kid at the beginning of the script who is just trolling strangers on the internet. He's come home from summer school. He has no friend or summer camp, which is the
camp album, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he's continuing a narrative from the previous Gambino album. He is sitting there, he's all alone, trolling strangers on the internet. And then we see him as a young man. And he realizes his life has no meaning. He kind of has this existential crisis. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know why he's here. He witnesses a shooting that, like, there's a gunfight right next to him, and like a bullet goes through his coat, and he sees a man die in front of him, and is like, that could have been me. Why am I even here? And then has this whole crisis of events where he like just explores why he's here. So some of the events, like he parties with his friends but realizes that nothing that they're doing means anything, and they're not being nice to other people, and all the trolling and all the jokes they make on the internet don't do anything. eventually this crisis reaches a point where he throws a bunch of people out of his mansion house and attempts suicide, which he survives. And then his father, who's the only parent that he has, passes away. And then he handles losing his father. He goes to Sweden. He meets somebody, a stranger on the internet, who helps him try and process these things. He comes home. He falls in love. He becomes a drug dealer. And eventually he is, you think he is he's murdered by some rival drug dealers who are also police officers, or who might be, it's kind of very vague at the end. Yeah, and we tried to we traced this whole narrative in detail on the show, which was like a big cornerstone of it. So we talk about the narrative through the album and the script, and kind of how those walk hand in hand.
Yeah, it was really interesting listening to your Dissect episodes, which are essentially, you're doing literary readings, would you say, of the content, and you're helping people to sort out what certain images or symbols or references, there's quite a lot of referentiality, what those things might be doing together as a whole, and the specificity and also the wholeness of the thing are sort of interwoven in the way you sort it out, which I thought was kind of reflected a sort of metamodern sensibility in itself. It was interesting for just looking at how we do interpretation these days.
Right.
So I was kind of interested to talk maybe about this created world, or this world building and intertextuality. And I mean, at first blush, I guess I would think that the genre and the if you want to call it that, and the form, I guess, might be used by Donald Glover, Childish Gambino, to sort of upset old categories of delineating art forms by how they're packaged, produced, marketed. Here's an album, here's a screenplay, here's a video, this. And so that sort of upsetting those categories seems like it might be important to the artist. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really a thing about connection, and the method of creation reflects that. All of these things are connected. We have to figure out how they connect to us. And that in itself reflects, kind of what I've taken away from it, and kind of what I think, intentional or not, is the product of it, is how important connections are, and all that stuff. There's also just each of these forms are kind of aware or self-aware. So there's some self-reflexivity, and there's also just having all of this amazing creation, like that maximalism idea, I think plays a lot into it. Yeah.
So for me, where the work stands out as metamodern, as distinct from postmodern, is if all it was doing was bringing attention to our sort of fixed ideas about this is an album, and the album stops at the songs, and this is a concert, and that's something else, or whatever. If all it was doing was breaking down those categories, it maybe kind of more of a postmodern thing. But where I see it becoming metamodern is that again, like if it were postmodern, you might have this web of interconnected intertextual items, but the items themselves might be kind of shallow and superficial, and the main enjoyment the listener, viewer, audience, reader would be just playing the game of discovering those connections. But what makes this work, this extended work, metamodern, is that each of the little nodes in the network are in and of themselves chock full of meaning.
Absolutely.
And so instead of as a postmodernist would merely using this kind of networked art form to upset our categorizations, it's more like he's using it because he's saying, like, to really represent and give access to the full experience of what it is to be today, you need to make this network.
Yes.
So it's like a building of more meaning rather than a destruction of meaning.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really like the way that was put. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense with everything. And I think that was part of what he was doing. I don't know how much like we want to talk about this, but like I think part of like critical or cultural reception at the time was that wasn't as seen. And
Mm-hmm.
what I try to do with like the fact that I create all this stuff, the fact that I like had to push, like I had to pitch this and had to try to make and like influence Dissect, I guess, to do this season at all. Right. Part of why I try so much to raise the awareness of this and the study of this is because each part has so much going on. But it takes time. Like things take time to explore. You have to take time to, you have to spend that with it. And that's, you can increase the value of these things by spending the time with them. And that's part of one of the points that he tried to make was, you know, oftentimes we're moving so quickly, but what if we tried to spend more time with the things and think more deeply, and put some more meaning into them? So
Another way that we can look a little bit at the way this distinguishes a kind of metamodern sensibility is, I liked the way you described it as a created world with a metamodern sense of simultaneous danger and safety related to identity and existence. And so, you know, being able to presence that danger part, you wrote about like the deconstruction of social precedents and the preservation of the evidence of our mistakes online, our assaults on our privacy, and these problematic aspects of the
yes.
internet and the world that we live in because of the internet
Mhm.
coexist, as you wrote, with the web's capacity for connection and the tools that it presents. I'm quoting you now. And those are the very tools that he employed to create Because the Internet.
Mhm.
So, and here's one of my favorite quotes of yours is, exploring his own multi-hyphenate identity, revealing his vulnerabilities and existential crisis, Glover places faith in audiences to interact with and help his exploration. The sincerity of his outreach is the metamodern response to the cynicism of the web's dangers.
Yeah.
So to me, it's precisely because he's engaging all these aspects of the current moment in this oscillatory fashion. He's not hiding from or brushing past the most difficult or confrontative aspects, you know, to usher people towards some positive conclusion. And he's not simply presenting this tangle of contemporary issues in which we exist right now with this simple kind of statement that this is all fucked up, you know. He's living this kind of the truth in quotes of each of these perspectives and then wrapping the whole thing in this supreme level of, you know, interest and humanity of everyone. That's to me what makes it seem quite metamodern.
Yeah. He talked about, we're building the internet every day. We need to build humanity into it as well. And I think that just as far as like the last thing you were saying, but he really vulnerably dealt with some very dangerous, I guess is the right way to put it, aspects and ideas. He was very honest in some of these ways that he showed that he had lived through some of this, right? Like, and this goes with the interweaving of his real life into the narrative, and blurring the lines of what's fiction and what's real. But as he talked about in an interview, and I try to talk about this sensitively, he attempted suicide. He had come to a point in his life where he did not think there was any meaning to any of this anymore. He lost any faith or hope in it. And he attempted to leave. And then he came back and he was brought in and connected with the people closest to him. And he was able to build something from it. And he then showed that in the work. The importance of connection and the importance of, you know, our bonds being the thing that we can use to build. He also dealt with other vulnerable stuff, such as racism, such as an exploration of sexuality that I think that this is a little more complicated, but like he explored it, saw people weren't as engaged with it as he thought might happen, and then I think altered course. But yeah, he really like vulnerably and honestly showed what he was going through, and then showed the struggles and, like, I guess his solutions or his processes for experiencing them.
I have to say, just because you phrased it exactly that way, the last time I was sort of sorting through my notes, getting ready for our conversation, I started looking at some of the material, but the sort of the structure of the material as a reflection of the Buddhist Four Noble Truths. And I wasn't sure whether to bring this out or not.
Please
but,
do. Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So and this is for me, as my background is in religious studies and comparative religion, especially Asian religions as they've come to the West. So the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism are, the first noble truth is just the truth of suffering, that life is suffering. And to me, it seems like the whole plot of the life of this generic person, the boy, it's just full of these very ordinary and common types of suffering that are depicted: heartbreak, family estrangement. And honestly, if we look at Donald Glover's show, Atlanta, all of those episodes seem to me to center on this theme of sort of life as suffering, which we can talk more about. And then the second noble truth is that there's a cause to suffering. So in this case, I think the internet.
Because the internet.
Yeah, because the internet. And so it's like, you use this phrase, and I forget whose original phrase it is, but it's like a gun in the hands of an infant.
Yeah, Donald said that during interviews at the time. Yeah.
That the internet is like that. And so especially in the sense that you were just speaking of, that there's racial inequity as another cause of suffering right there, that he mentions at some point, and you'll have to forgive me because I can't remember if it's within Dissect or something else that I watched, but he says, with life, if it's like a cake, we can't just eat the creamy top of it. We have to eat the crust, or we have to eat the stuff we don't love and the stuff that we love, so that we can understand life.
Donald has said that for years. He's kind of used this metaphor of like, it's our diet, but it's like, what do we eat? Are we eating just entertainment? Are we eating just the sweet stuff? Or are we eating our vegetables? He has like a song called Eat Your Vegetables, where he like kind of really tries to throw this in our face. But the idea is, and he kind of talks about this in interviews, like, you want to bake in everything. Instead of trying to just take one side in, or one aspect in, or one idea in, if in our art, in our work, we can try and bake in everything, then that's a more holistic actual experience, and that's more reflective of what we're going through.
Yeah.
I've experienced that in my listening to the music. Is he definitely has these kind of wholesome intentions that we're highlighting here, but also, and I see this especially in the live performances even more than just like listening to the songs, like he gets raunchy too. Like he's raunchy, and he does all the sort of stereotypical stuff that you expect in rap, in the kind of street rap or whatever, that like he's not just this kind of outsider taking the form over in order to achieve these wholesome missions. Like he's a hip-hop guy, he's a rapper. Am I saying that in a way
I think that there's a lot of stuff. Are you talking like for the live performances? I wonder if you're talking about the Deep Web tour and Because of the Internet, or if you're thinking about like later ones.
I'm not sure what it was.
Does he have a shirt on?
I don't remember.
Okay. Typically, if he does have a white t-shirt on, it's the Because of the Internet. But if he doesn't, that's some of the stuff afterwards. And he uses that in a couple of different cool ways of like, and his manager has said something to this effect of like, Donald doesn't have a shirt on because he's going to show you he's black. Like, that's what he's forcing you to deal with. And so he's not going to wear a shirt, so you have to see it. That's kind of what Fam Rothstein has said or tweeted at one point as one part of what he's doing there. And as far as like the raunchiness, yeah, there's lots of different aspects of that. There's a part in the Deep Web tour where he is like, he pantomimes self-pleasuring himself because that's what's going through in a scene, or that's what he's like struggling with. There's also like a threesome in a scene where he's unable to perform, and that's like a vulnerable thing that he shows. He's like, hey guys, guess what, I couldn't do this, which is not typical.
Right.
I don't know how many artists are gonna do that.
And yet he's being sexual too.
Yeah,
so
exactly,
it's kind of that oscillation of
one moment that was a piece of learning for me was along the lines of fabricating different identities for ourselves in different arenas, like on social media and on the internet. The notion was put out that the persona of the rapper is like a model for this, and he mentions that the rapper assumes identities and beliefs and affects and raunchiness or what have you, specifically for the work they're doing. And we all accept this kind of doubling or this masking. And he's a Black person, and he says, you have to change who you are a lot just to be respected. There's this schizophrenic aspect to it. Even to get a cab, I remember him saying. So it's like, we can't, if we're going to be racially sensitive, he doesn't say this because he's not as overtly programmatic like this, but it's like, back to the cake, we have to be able to eat the difficult parts and really be honest about. I feel like that there's an urgency behind that. We have to get honest, and we have to get able to understand this predicament that we're all in with respect to the internet.
Yeah, because our perceptions of each other are colored by so many things other than what we're actually faced with. And he talks about this, I think, uses, whether it's being a rapper, being whatever, uses this as like a model when he says, this idea of what is a rapper, like that's just a version of this person. And this plays out. He's like, guys, we have to realize, like, I go to the grocery store and somebody wants to talk to me like this or like that, and it's like, I'm not that person right now. And he's kind of uniquely situated in a few ways to deal with this and grapple with this from his multi-hyphenate just like career, from the fact that he has different names, right? Donald Glover or Childish Gambino, or the boy who he's infused so much of his life with. And then he shows, and everybody else is doing this too. When you're on the internet, you're portraying different versions of yourself. When he uses like a specific example in one interview, he's like, when some little kid is on Vine saying F you and trying to like be very tough, that's not the kid. That's the version of themselves they're creating for this video or for the internet to try to get something across. And we have to like see all of a person and realize that there is that each of us are an entire, like, we are the product of an internet, of all these different connections that we make, all the different ways we're seen, that there's so much going on that we're not always grappling with.
Right. And not just as, a well-known artist who has the chance to do, to split himself into different identities. Like he says, I think is on the last track, he says, this track features Donald Glover.
Yes.
And then he's asked, he says, I don't know where the line actually is. I feel like Childish Gambino and Donald Glover speak to each other. And you can like one and not like the other. But that he's trying to make the point, I believe that we're all like that. We all have, just as you already said more eloquently than I'm doing, but I'm just sort of bringing it back to like this sense it's not a simple duality either of either or. It's this multipleness.
Yes.
And
however,
go ahead.
I was like, because when we think about metamodern identity, and I kind of want to like try and figure out if I can drive this home right now, is that the metamodern identity we're understanding and thinking about, within the postmodern context of there's so much stuff tearing us apart. Maybe you aren't, like, you don't have an identity. But we also have to, we think about protecting the interior felt self, so that there is an interaction between all the different versions of ourself, and that needs to be protected. Like, because sometimes we try to think, and this is just me thinking, I guess, out loud. sometimes we try to think of like, who's the true me? Who am I really? Like, am I really a nice person? Or am I really a bad person? Am I really smart? Or am I really dumb? You're both. And we have to understand that both of those are inside of us and outside of us, that we can be perceived in different ways, and that we can act in different ways. And it's just this, there's so many relationships and connections that are producing all these different versions of ourselves, but that that is ourself, is the product of all of our connections. And like, I think we talked about this in the finale of Dissect, but like the answer possibly to the question of who am I is because the internet, that we are the product of all of these connections, and that's an interior that we can protect, or at least think about.
Yeah, actually, Linda and I were talking recently about, we were like trying to distinguish how identity pluralism seems to be a thing in postmodernism, but we often talk about it in metamodernism, and what the difference is. And what I came up with, which I feel like it really kind of matches with what you were just saying, Cam, about Donald Glover's work, is under postmodernism, so backing up, modernism asserts the self, sort of rising up and distinguishing itself from just sort of the generalized mass of tradition and society at large. It's like individuals assert themselves as independent agents with agency and sovereignty. And then postmodernism questions, like you were saying. Postmodernism says, is there really such a thing as the self? Maybe there is no such thing as the self. And then in postmodern art forms, often plurality is used to challenge notions of the self. So, it'll say, well, if there's all these different versions of the self, can you really say that any one of them is the real self? Maybe there is no real self, and maybe these different plural versions of the self aren't even necessarily all part of one thing. Maybe they're just different nodes floating around separately. And then metamodernism, instead of using the plurality of self to undermine notions of the self, it's using it to extend the self. And it's saying, like, in order to really capture the full interiority, you need all these facets. You need these different faces, names, identities, and they actually all support each other in interiority. And I feel like that's the direction Donald Glover / Childish Gambino goes with this stuff. Yeah, and I was thinking back to how you were originally kind of characterizing the story in Because the Internet, where you've got this kind of wealthy young man who has nothing at the beginning. He has nothing to do besides kind of play in the postmodern version of the web, as I would call it.
He's just trolling. He's just trolling and being mean and just destroying other people online. That's what all he's doing. Yeah,
and the enjoyment he's getting is just in bopping around through this web, through this hall of mirrors, and sort of finding all the facets. And then, like you said, he kind of has a realization and wants to bring something meaningful into all of that. But we often talk about metamodern artworks as not just abandoning or critiquing postmodernism, but kind of oscillating between inhabiting the postmodern playfulness and inhabiting a more modernist kind of sense of mission and purpose and meaningfulness. So do you think that in the parts of Because the Internet where he is being that trollish guy, like, would it be fair to say that it fully inhabits that? Like, when you're listening, is the listener kind of having fun in the way that the boy was when that was what he was doing, or am I reaching with that?
I think I get what you're saying. So let's take, for example, we can take the song The Worst Guys. Okay. In the song The Worst Guys, he is partying with his friends and they're having a great old time. And this is like the beginning of the story. And the phrase "all she needed was some" is like repeated over and over again. All she needed was some. All she needed was, like, they keep repeating that over and over again. It is the most repeated phrase I've ever heard, like, in a row. And what the boy is realizing is like, oh, this doesn't make me happy. This doesn't mean anything. And we have hyper repetition of that phrase in a very postmodern way of like, look, this phrase doesn't mean anything. There was even on his website at the time, it was presented as a multiple choice question on page 69 of the website. So, where there were like 4 options, and it was like, they're very crude, most of them. And so he like, that tears it apart. But then, and so like, that's what's happening in that moment. This is like a party song. Like, a lot of people love this song. They're like, yeah, The Worst Guys, this is the best song. I get to have my fun right now. And so that's like, people are having fun. But this is also the song where by the end of the song, he cannot get an erection when he is presented with the opportunity to have sex and engage in this debauchery that he has been praising himself for, and that all of his friends are praising each other for. And he's just not able to do it anymore. As the song goes into like a guitar solo that is like the super phallic climactic point. So yeah, there's like a definite that's happening there, I think.
Maybe that's a good segue back to the my schema of the Four Noble Truths being
cool.
represented. Because the third noble truth is that there's an end to suffering. And I guess to me, what I was seeing was both what you just highlighted there, which is he's realizing what doesn't have meaning. He's realizing, oh, that's not working for me to generate a sense of meaning anymore. And the culminating one, the biggest one, of course, is his realization that he has during his suicide attempt. So you could take that. I just find this really fascinating. You could take that kind of like a nihilistic end. There's an end to suffering. The end. Okay, well, kill yourself. That's what the solution is. But I don't see it that way. I mean, my reading is not that, but that what the boy realizes by trying to take his life and then having a kind of a moment of awakening, he kind of realizes that the solution isn't to end himself, but in a way, it's not that either. So hang with me here. And I think this is reflected in some of your readings too, Cam, is that he's looking for realness or reality. So something has to die. Something has to be shown to be empty and not real. So he manages, to find a sense of no meaning, but that's also like the very opening words of BTI are "Who am I?" Right?
Mm-hmm. Those are his first words. Yeah,
those are the boy's first words. So that to me can be taken both as it's like a real cry for help, like it's a real personal crisis point, the most serious one you can have, obviously, if you're suicidal, and you think that taking your own life is going to be the answer. But it's also this really high spiritual truth in some traditions, and I don't actually think those are two different things or opposite things, because they both involve staring into the face of not knowing, of self-annihilation, the shattering of this ego self that's been driving your action. So he's shattering that.
Yes.
And what jumped out for me as he keeps walking past this Buddha in the in the videos that show him in the, what is there?
And the house is called the temple.
The temple. The house is called the temple.
Yeah. The center of that is this statue of a Buddha that keeps coming across. It is definitely an important stressed motif that often gets glanced over. But it's definitely like a connective figure for the boy. And there's also parallels between the story of Buddha and the story of the boy because they both realize life's inherent meaninglessness upon seeing death. When the boy sees Jay die, and from my understanding of Buddha, when he sees like death and suffering, and realizes, oh my goodness, I've been rich, I've been a prince, I've been all this stuff, but there's so much pain going on, and there's so much suffering and all of that. So they're parallels. There are even shots in the short film Clapping for the Wrong Reasons, which is a part of this, where there's a beautiful, and I think I mentioned this to you all before, but there's this beautiful shot of the beginning, near the beginning, of the Buddha staring right at Gambino, and the Buddha has incense, so there's smoke coming up, and Gambino is taking a hit from a Pax vaporizer, so there's smoke coming from him as well. And they're just staring directly at each other, and it's like a perfect parallel. The work from Hiro Murai, the director, and like obviously he's working on cinematography and stuff, and this comes across in some of his other works, but to place those two right there, they're directly like parallel, like they're connected very strongly.
Does it seem like he's suggesting like that the character of the boy is taking a hit? He's taking a hit from real life, and he's standing in front of this iconic statue, and it's not either or. Again, it's both. It's the consideration that you don't sort of get absorbed in Buddhist shunyata, or the experience of the self-realization through emptiness, and then just like lose yourself. You're still the boy standing there in a living room, taking a hit from actual life.
Yeah. And the Buddha comes up at a couple crucial moments, such as right before the boy attempts suicide. And it's also, drugs are used as a form of connection in the way that they alleviate or provide like a heightened sense of experience. And like a drug dealer is called your connect. So when he talks about like connection being the most important thing, like that's why the boy becomes a drug dealer. He becomes a plug, so technology stuff right back in there, and a connect. So like that's what he's trying to do. Once he's like trying to figure out what to do with his life in the script, it's like, okay, I'm going to become the connect. And he's not necessarily great at it, but that's what he's trying to do. Because I've seen online like some conversation of like, why does he become a drug dealer at the end? That doesn't make any sense. It's because it's connection, and because of how drugs and weed in particular just appear in the story.
Yeah. Well, and there, I mean, as this is the religious studies background in me, but I would want to draw a parallel maybe even to Tantra, because Tantra is the idea of using transgression to get to the other side, kind of. So yeah, to me, there's the initial hit is, oh, you don't want him to be a drug dealer. You want him to find a righteous path. And then you're like, oh, it's so perfect that he
and
does.
Also, sorry, I don't want to step over you, but like the drugs are in the beginning debaucherous, but then he tries to like his attempt at suicide is an OD, like he's attempting to overdose, but then through that he figures out how to make a meaning out of it. Yeah.
Linda, what about the fourth noble truth?
Yes. And so the fourth noble truth is the path actually to the end of suffering. I guess what I was seeing through this lens, what his suggested path might be. Although first I want to say, I don't think that Donald Glover or Childish Gambino is beholden to provide an answer with their art. And I actually find that perspective somewhat annoying, because it delimits what an artist can do if we're always requiring them to like answer the question for us in the way that we'd like them to, or whatever. So, but anyway, I think that he is providing some suggestions, and they're not easy ones or straightforward ones. So that makes it more fun for us. Like he says, you've got to build a bigger world rather than just make albums within a given, paradigm of creative outlet or whatever. But what, I want to ask you, Cam, and just talk about, what does this actually mean? Should we all be creating using radical intertextuality, or using technology to make things more real? What does it mean to build a bigger world? What do you think about his, message there, per se?
Right. So this is an interesting and complex thing, because he hasn't always done this since he said this, right? He hasn't made, like, because the internet exists, there isn't another one. There's no like next thing that he's made. For instance, his most recently released album is only music. It is a white album cover. There are no titles to the songs. They're just the code of what time they start on the album. So he went maximalism to minimalism, so he's done both of those things. But when he talked about building a bigger world, he's talking about showing all the connections, how important it is to realize the interconnectivity of us all. But he's also like, he's building humanity into all of these things, which is what we have to do, right? Like because we're creating the internet every moment by our interactions, but also like the physical, like people who are coding it or people who are building like or coding different technologies and devices. Like we're building everything, and we have to build everything into it. Otherwise, it's going to keep destroying us, just as all the other things that we have built will destroy us if we don't build it for everyone and build it for everything, right? We have a societal structure that does not allow for everyone to survive in our country. We don't have that, right? Like everyone doesn't get to survive in America because we've built this competitive capitalistic society. When we're building the internet and we're building technology right now, the same things are happening. And we can see these things in like a bunch of different small ways that might help us figure out what I guess I'm trying to say here. We talk about like facial recognition technology. People are trying to point out, hey, the people who are coding all of this stuff, if these people who had the privilege to get all the education to get into the spot where they can code all this high technology, that's not going to be representative of everyone. And so the code they make is not going to be representative of everyone. And we see this play out in ways of facial recognition for minorities not being as effective or being detrimental in certain ways. And I feel like I'm getting very tangentially off track here. Where I'm trying to point out. Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, where it's almost like prejudice is built right into the facial recognition software because it mixes up different people of color.
Yes.
And so someone will get pegged as the culprit that wasn't at all involved, because, you know, it's almost like the classic, you know, old school where they bring the victim and the five men are all black and the victim can't tell the difference between them. So he or she just points to one of them randomly who's innocent. And it's almost like we're creating that in our facial recognition software. Yes. And it's not done on purpose.
Right.
It's done out of negligence because they train the software on white people. So the software gets really good at distinguishing the fine differences of white people. And then you put 3 black people into the lineup and they look so different from all the hundreds of thousands of white people that the software has learned to distinguish that it can't tell the difference between those three.
There's like a joke about that in Community too, where Pierce has like a security system that identifies white people as okay and black people or minorities as intruders. But to bring it back to Because Internet, because I'm like now
but I love that you connected it to Community, where Donald Glover was Troy, and Community is a classic metamodern TV show, and we do want to get into Community in Atlanta at some point.
Worldstar is the song where this appears the most, because Worldstar is indicative of the way on the web, which in its ideal sense, when the internet was created, there was an idea that you could be anybody. The internet was supposed to be an equal playing field. If you can get internet access, you can be on the web and do anything that anybody else can do. But this is not true because our systems have not allowed internet access to everyone. And we can't do that because we're built on this flawed basis of our society. And then what Worldstar really shows is like a racial inequity in representation on the internet. The way that worldstar.com, and I don't know if anybody, like how familiar everybody is with it anymore, because it was more popular than I think it is now, but there is like, it's like a cesspool of the internet, but it's also a beautiful part of the internet because it's a place where like these real gritty things are shown, like fight videos, but then also like rap videos, but then also like hypersexualized material and content and music and art and fighting, and all of this stuff is shown on this website. And people that affects people's perception of people in real life, because there's so many fight videos on Worldstar. When there's a fight in real life, people will shout Worldstar and start recording it, and start recording the fact that as we destroy each other and fight each other, we're going to film that and put that on the web because people love to see that and it's so entertaining. But what we're not getting is those are real human beings that are in there that we're looking at and seeing as entertainment fodder. And I don't know, there's so much going on there and there's so much to talk about, but that's kind of why that Worldstar episode of Dissect, I think, is so important, and why that's like the thesis spot too. Because if you look at BTI and the album, Worldstar is the last song of the first act. It's exactly where, and I'm a ninth grade English teacher, it's exactly where you put the thesis, the end of the intro paragraph to get us going. Like that's the thesis, is the song Worldstar and everything going on there, where we see the destruction that we're wreaking on everyone, but we also see everybody's desire, like innately, to build ourselves up. The chorus of the second half being, we don't want to be on Worldstar, we just want to be a Worldstar. We want to be great. We want to evolve. And the beautiful dual structure to that song and everything that goes on there is also then a mirror for the whole narrative and things like that. Yeah.
That fits into like the last comment I guess I would make about the connection to the Four Noble Truths, or the fourth of the Four Noble Truths, which is what's the solution here, or what's the way out of suffering, is that especially in the song Life, the Biggest Troll.
Yes, I think that fits it well.
Yeah. So I think the overall ethos is that we shouldn't be ashamed. We should accept our imperfections, that we're all made of these faults, and we're doing a lot of shit out there, like you just mentioned, that may not be what we really ultimately want for ourselves, but we're doing stupid shit. We're doing stuff all the time that undermines ourselves. We're destined to make these mistakes, and so we ought to care for each other as we're messing up. So it's really simple. But I think this connects to the ethos that we see on the TV shows Community, Bojack Horseman, The Good Place, Modern Family, also present in Girls and Fleabag. And to me, these are among shows that really stand out as metamodern. So it's like he again, we're treading over territory we've already covered a bit, that there's this sense of attempt to create an illusion of perfection out there. And then our perfections inevitably show up online. So then they're magnified. And this is directly from your Dissect, that we freeze these versions of ourselves in our most imperfect moments. So, he seems to be saying, vying for more honesty and true expression, but this humanity that has to be built into, I'm just restating how you'd put it, but like before it's too late. What does before it's too late mean to him?
All right, so that question is a great question. The idea of whether or not things are too late, like trying to build humanity into the web and trying to make sure that we're gonna make it, and trying to like build in all this stuff into the web before it's too late. I think it's a good time to talk about like his later work. There's a song "Feels Like Summer," which appears on a collection called the Summer Pack, and on his on Childish Gambino's potential last album, 3:15:20. And the song "Feels Like Summer" deals with, it's really like, how does he feel right now? And it's kind of the most recent thing we have, and it's a thing that he's kept putting on work for a couple of years now, so it seems rather set in. But he talks about like the environmental impacts of humanity, and he talks about, you can feel it in the streets on a day like this, the heat, it feels like summer. So he's talking about climate change, and he talks about like birds dying, like he talks about animals dying and running out of water and things. And he says, I know you know that pain. I'm hoping that this world will change, but it just seems the same. So, because he's asked for help, and because of the internet, he ended the album after going through all these things, and on Life, the Biggest Troll, and his last words are, please help me. So there is both the irony of life being a troll, but also the sincerity of, hey guys, please help. Like, we can do something about this. And so I don't know if it's been realized, and I don't know how he feels it's developed, but when I look at a song like Feels Like Summer, it looks like hopelessness a little bit. It looks like we've gone too far. We didn't change the things we needed to change. We have destroyed our planet. We are destroying each other. We're not changing. Nobody's listening. We're not being connected. So we have to accept that. And I think that's what the most recent album does in a beautiful way, is says, look at all the ways we are destroying the planet and destroying ourselves. Humanity, we're going to end. And then the question of the most recent work is, can I still love us? And the final song on that, he says, there's love in every moment under the sun. Do what you want to do. So the idea is, human beings were going to end, and we were given a planet, we were given a world, and we're going to destroy ourselves or it, whichever one comes first. And that's what we did. And you know, and so I grapple with this a lot and trying to think about this, and I haven't had the opportunity to spend like the entire year that I did of intensive writing on Dissect for BTI. Like, as I think about like the more recent work, it seems like a acceptance of our doomed fate and love for it at the same time, which to me comes across as metamodern.
Yeah, to me too.
But yeah, that's kind of how I mean, it might be too late. Like, I mean,
there's this term I've come across, and post-tragic. And I don't know for sure how the people who kind of came up with the term meant it. So if I'm, stealing it and using it in my own way, I apologize to those people. But what post-tragic means to me is like this sense where you accept the tragedy fully and then go beyond that. That's the post part. Then you go beyond the tragedy and kind of re-inhabit the humanity and the gratefulness for just having experience in the first place. And so there's this sort of like loving acceptance of the end of the world, or of the end of somebody's life, or kind of going back to the Buddhist thing, Linda, of this sort of inherent suffering to existence. So I guess, like, to me, the post-tragic is a loving cessation of resistance to the tragic. And to me, that's metamodern in kind of the way it just wraps all of the different reactions together. And if I was going to do like a follow-up to my 11 methods of metamodern, 11 metamodern methods in the arts, I would add the post-tragic as another one of them, if I had another 5 or something like that.
Let's actually make sure we have time to talk about some of the other Donald Glover products that we love so much. His television shows, for example, Community and Atlanta.
Yeah, a couple things that have come up made me think of Atlanta. Well, one of them is just how you were talking about the death that the boy witnesses, and that kind of being a spur. And in Atlanta, I think it's the very first episode. Yeah, the very first scene in the very first
scene. Yep,
is this death, this murder, which kind of propels everything. And that, and then I think that in both cases they connect to something that Donald Glover actually experienced in real life, as I understand it. But another thing, we were talking about representation, and one thing that's metamodern about it is how he works with representation. So on the one hand, we're seeing a very, black, quote unquote, or whatever, black story. These 3 black men dealing with things that people from the outside might not see every day. but then at the same time, it's not trying to be a universalized representation of the Black experience. And it doesn't lose the interiority of the characters in order to kind of carry out some sort of agenda about representation. It's simply, the specific story of these quirky guys they are Black guys, but they're also Ern and Darius and Paperboy, who there's nobody like those three guys, in the world at all. So there's this like sort of oscillation between a kind of postmodern project of sort of doing this generalized representation of a marginalized experience, and then that oscillating with the like very individualized expression of these three guys. Does that seem like a fair assessment?
That seems about right. I also want to I guess this is a good point to mention too, that when Glover was creating Atlanta, there's a quote from an interview like early on in the development where he said that he saw Atlanta as a metaphor for all Black people, in that it was everything, and that a human being, because we've been talking about how all of these things that we contain, like we cannot allow typecasting. Like we cannot allow that, because that isn't eating the vegetables. There is so much going on with all of us, and all of us are so much, that to allow for underrepresentation is not building humanity into our stories, right? And so that Atlanta then is a chance at, and it seems to be a project for building everything, and building all of humanity into these stories. Because while they are like very individual, like they're individuals, but there is a universality in some of what they do, or in some of like the feelings or ideas we could get from them, I guess.
Yeah, like the character of Darius, for example, which some people would maybe think is the most
he's super metamodern.
super metamodern.
Super.
He seems the most sort of quirky, I guess. And
is definitely, yep, that's the one.
Yeah, for me, while I was tracking that character, I was sort of noting my, sort of like annoyance with certain of the character's behaviors or whatever, and then so glad when the character does something that saves the day in a haphazard fashion, becomes the one who makes a micro moment make sense. And it's not like anything ever gets like saved in a kind of resolve everything in a nice neat bow kind of way. And I find that a metamodern component of the show. And I find that it reminds me quite a lot of a show that we talked about in our last episode, which is Bojack Horseman. And Cam, as you pointed out, there's a scene in one of the episodes of Atlanta in the second season where one of the characters, without naming the show Bojack Horseman,
It was Darius.
Or Tracy. Tracy's the one who does it.
Oh.
Yeah, so Tracy is talking to Ern, and they're at the mall, and Tracy's like, and then when he did the thing with her daughter, it's like, can I even feel bad for this horse anymore? And it's like, that's Bojack.
Yeah.
So he's saying, like, he's walking along, the character in Atlanta. So we're going massive reference humor here. Yes. So they're walking along talking about this episode of another show, which one of Donald Glover's co-stars from Community is a main character in that show, Allison Brie, her voiced character. And in the comments in the YouTube clip, when you see this, you can go, find that exact clip. I was having so much fun reading those because people were writing things like, that's how I feel about the character of Ern. So that he keeps making these mistakes that you want to kind of, hit him over the head and say, come on, dude.
And Tracy's telling Ern this.
Yeah, and Ern is Donald Glover's character in Atlanta.
Yep. Yeah, and Ern's response is kind of like, okay.
Yeah. like it's going over his head. He's
not picking up on it. And I mean, he's like Princeton educated. He's not picking up on it. So he's frustrating. Ern is a frustrating character.
Yeah.
And yet Ernest.
Yes.
So what was so interesting was that in the course of reading people's comments, they started to intermix when they were talking about characters in Atlanta or characters in Bojack. You know, if they didn't name the character, you actually would have not have known for sure which show they were even talking about. So that reference humor, which the show Community was very well known for, in fact, criticized for in its early years, and then sort of forgiven later and given a lot of props for how incredible it is, you know, carries over to Atlanta in a major way, I think, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I try to think about in like the development of Donald Glover in TV, because he gets Community. Like he gets to be like, it's not like that he learns everything from that, because he also had 30 Rock, but that he wrote for 30 Rock, writes for Community, and in doing so, like this is like he's got a degree in dramatic writing, and then he gets however many years of some of the best television that we've had, so that he can then blossom from that.
Right.
Right. And I'm sorry, what, like, was it about like the references? Is
The
that transferring over?
referentiality
I
of
don't
the
think that Atlanta's hugely intertextual besides that moment. And
Well, wait, it is. I think it is. So let's
Is
talk. Let's think about this for a second,
Okay.
because he does it. For instance, the album cover for "Awaken My Love" appears in an episode of Atlanta before the album comes out. So
oh,
on the Juneteenth episode of Atlanta, that complicated character of the husband, of the white husband who's there celebrating Juneteenth in his office, which has a bunch of art and artifacts and a lot of material that is mostly dealing with and focused on Africa. He has the "Awaken My Love" album cover before it's come out, before we know anything about it, which is, and I mean, you can kind of, there, you can't really see it. I have it up on the wall,
Oh.
but it's like it appears in the work, right? He also had like he had a performance at Joshua Tree. There's like a wine bottle that has like Joshua Tree in big letters, and it's like, why did you put that right next to your character unless you're pointing out the performance you had right before this? Which, like, I mean, so it is hyper self-referential to his own work. And then there is a lot of references to other things going on, and it's a lot of work with like real life, such as the episode where Van wants to go to Drake's house for a party, and it's like Drake's not even there. And there's a very long history of Childish Gambino and Drake. Like that is super complicated in ways that I don't think gets acknowledged a lot, because like they were, in many ways, it was like, okay, which of these two is going to win? And pop culture kind of decided, oh, Drake gets to win. He's more popular. He gets to do all, and like they took very different paths, but they're both actors making music, if you just want to look at it like that. They both released albums on the same day in 2011. So it was a kind of a, like, who's going to get more sales on that day. So they kind of have these parallel paths that are interesting to examine together. So when Donald Glover has a TV episode that deals with Drake, like that is very referential to his own career.
okay.
And even Teddy Perkins, the Michael Jackson-ness of that character is also a reference to Donald Glover and Childish Gambino. And he is also trying to figure out his own career and where he stands. And you can kind of see that on the page and on the screen. So I think there is a lot of there are a lot of references in Atlanta. I don't think that it is played off as a joke as much as they did it in Community, or played off as like a overt thing. Like they don't have an episode of Paintball. They're not going to do that on Atlanta unless they do in season 3. I have no idea.
But they do especially in season 2, they do a lot of sort of weird episodes.
Yes. Yeah.
Like Teddy Perkins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's different from most TV.
Yes.
In similar ways that Community is different from most TV, in that like they'll just go off on some weird idea, like whether it's the Teddy Perkins or whether the one where Paperboy is on this whole like mission just to get home through the woods, and all these things, special episodes that kind of have like a theme or have like a something supernatural or surreal
It's
about.
the I'm thinking about the list of the method. It's the double frame almost. Like when they
Yeah.
have the invisible car. It's
Yeah.
like, do you buy the invisible car? Because there's Instagram posts of this fake NBA athlete with the invisible car.
Yeah.
So you have to buy into that and then to see all those things.
Yeah. The double frame is where an unreal element kind of surrounds the whole storyline. So the audience kind of has to make a choice to just say like, this is dumb, I don't buy into it, in which case they can walk away, or they have to take in everything that's being offered, including the emotional story, the story of the interiority of the characters. And that's a concept that was developed by Raoul Eshelman, if anybody wants to learn more about that. But then speaking of referentiality, sort of in a more superficial way, but like to me it's fun because like, okay, so we think that Donald Glover's work is metamodern, but then you have the question of like, does Donald Glover like other metamodern? I mean, there's the question of, does Donald Glover know the term metamodernism, and does he think of himself as? But even if he doesn't know the term metamodernism, does he have a metamodern aesthetic? And so, like there's the reference to Bojack Horseman in Atlanta, with Bojack Horseman being we would call a metamodern show. And then there's a song, I think it's on the Camp album, where he says I'm the only black kid at a Sufjan show, right?
He has in college he did an entire remix of the Illinois album by Sufjan. Like,
dying to hear
loves Sufjan. Yes.
Yeah.
Sufjan Stevens we're talking about.
Sufjan Stevens.
Yeah.
And we can't go into why. We could do a whole show on Sufjan Stevens, a whole episode on Sufjan Stevens, but he's a metamodern musician. And then Ben Folds is
referenced on Sweatpants.
Referenced on Sweatpants. And then I think Donald Glover and Lena Dunham of Girls are close. And
he was on Girls.
He was on Girls. And
he was on Girls, and then I think he had a tense relationship with how he was used on Girls.
Right.
And his comment was, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Okay.
So, he references it though. He makes a little reference in the song, is it Life, Biggest Troll?
Yes, he does.
Mentions girls.
Hang with girls like Helena.
But yeah, so even if he ultimately didn't have a good experience or whatever, with the production,
he was involved in it.
It's like, these are the things that are in his aesthetic world.
And how about another one that we're big fans of is Freaks and Geeks, the television show. And was that a title of a song?
Yes, the title of like was that his first big song? I don't know. He had one of his first music videos, and like the most one of the first impactful ones. Yeah, it's on the song Freaks and Geeks, titled it. So yeah.
So we've talked a decent bit about Atlanta and Community. He was just one of an ensemble cast, and he wasn't the writer or whatever, so it's not as much of an expression of Donald Glover, but it's a very metamodern show in the way that it kind of goes back and forth between a lot of playful intertextual elements, but also kind of like getting into some really serious stories about people's inner lives. Is there a way in which the Troy character, Donald Glover's character, is like either particularly metamodern as a character, or somehow connects to the work that Donald Glover did later? Like, is there a connection between Troy and the boy? Oh, they rhyme.
They rhyme, yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to think through this one. There's a bit of it in that he dealt with the identity thing because of Troy. People would come up to the streets and him in the streets and be like, "Hey, Troy," and he's like, "That's not who I am. Don't why?" But like, it's a part of him. He would reference it in his other work. So in his stand-up comedy, actually at the time, he's like, sometimes people come to my stand-up show expecting me to be Troy and Abed and Danny Pudi's going to be right here. That's not going to happen. And then he proceeds to like make a bunch of dick jokes that Troy would ever say on the NBC show Community, right? So he definitely was being self-referential with it, and he's carrying it into his other work. The idea that that character was not made for him, the idea that that character Troy was supposed to be something totally different, but that he showed it could be what he made it. I think him taking that character as a Trojan horse is the exact same thing he did with Atlanta, and he talks about this all the time. The show Atlanta was a Trojan horse. He pitched it to FX as, it's a show about a rapper and I'll have a new song for you every week, blah, blah, blah. So that they would take it because he knew it was going to be good. He knew it was going to be amazing, but he knew that pitching it wasn't necessarily going to come across to many, what's the word? I don't know. Channels.
Suits.
Yeah, exactly. So the Trojan horse of Troy is sort of a model that he's taken, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that I didn't know that. I didn't know that kind of he guided the character in a direction, but that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, like he's presented to us in the beginning of the show as a jock.
Exactly. It was supposed to be Pierce and Troy are Beavis and Butthead. That's how Dan Harmon wrote them. That's how he conceived of them.
Okay.
But then what happened was they got Donald Glover for Troy.
Yeah.
And so when you get him and he's not that, like he's not a jock, right? That the character, I think Donald talked about this in an interview. He's like, yeah, that character was written for a 6-foot white guy. That was not written for me.
Yeah.
And so but Donald took it, made it his own because of the relationship he had with Danny Pudi. They immediately caught on to the fact that Donald and Danny were going to be great together and on screen, that chemistry would work. And so, yeah, Donald Glover wasn't in the writer's room, but Donald Glover created so much of that show.
Yeah.
There's a reason why so many people are like, once Donald left, I'm not going to watch anymore. Like that happened. It's not just because we love Troy. It's because we do love the influence and we get the influence that Donald had on that show. Yeah.
Another way to address the question that's much more, just in the diegesis of the show is that, as you just alluded to, the friendship between Troy and Abed. I mean, Abed, they're all quirky characters. There's quirkiness abounding with each of the characters, and a real sense of their personalities are, rife with both the lovable and the kind of unlovable, which is not that unusual for a sitcom. But the character of Abed is arguably the most quirky, and the character that relates to him the best, that sort of gets him, that will be with him in his ways that are not as easy to be with for some others, is Troy.
Yeah, and Troy's right up there with Abed on the quirky.
Absolutely.
With Abed on the quirkiness scale.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think Troy isn't the most like outsider. He was the high school football star, whatever. He's not the most observant or the most intelligent as a character, but he's the one who can get and be with the specialness of Abed. So that seems metamodern to me, recognizing that felt experience.
I think that
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cam.
I was going to say one thing that just spoke to me about what you just said was he's an insider who becomes an outsider because he's the jock that then realizes that's not what I want to do and all those things. So I think the insider becomes an outsider, and then how that becomes so universally applicable.
And Donald, and what you're arguing is that Donald Glover himself may have been partially responsible for driving Troy's character in that direction.
Yeah, he's definitely partly responsible for that. There's also the fact that I don't know if you guys, like, I watch Community all the time. I have all the DVDs, I watch all the commentary, so this stuff is kind of just burned into my brain. But they're like, Dan Harmon has talked about this a few times where he's like, sometimes I didn't have a joke to end a scene, and so I said Donald says something funny. And so Troy would end the scene. So that's a bit of the writing thing.
I know that, Cam, you're really interested in some of the performance art aspects to BTI.
Absolutely. you want to like talk about those, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that was, I believe, very innovative about Because the Internet was the way that Donald Glover's public appearances during the time of creating and unveiling and rolling out Because the Internet were performance art. His existence in the public sphere, he was examining, exploring, toying with, how do I use Donald Glover? How do I use the Childish Gambino apparatus, the social media, all of these things to add to my creation? How do I put our real lives and show how it's engaged with the art that we're making and consuming? And so he wears a costume. He wears the same outfit as the character from the story for a year or more. And you have to understand, this is like, it's like 3 pairs of shorts, a pair of pants, same shoes. It's much like when a cartoon character wears the same outfit every day because the animators don't want to draw another outfit. It's like he's like, hey, look, it's kind of like I'm doing that in real life. And then he did a bunch of other performance art things that I think come across as metamodern because of how they value felt experience. So instead of doing a bunch of press appearances, which he did do a lot of press appearances, but he then supplemented this with these meetings in parks across North America. So he would tweet, hey, I'm going to be at the park in this city listening to the album. Come out, come hang with me. And so people would come and they'd want to like be hanging out with him. And he's wearing the outfit of the character, and he's carrying like a book with him that is like highly referenced in the work. And so that then gives some context to some of the ideas he's expressing in the album. And people could like talking to him, and it's like, am I talking to Donald Glover? Am I talking to Gambino? Am I talking to the boy? And it also is like, it values like we're making a connection right now. We are talking to each other and like living and feeling something like right now by being together, which I thought was really important. He also would do, because the events of the album and most of the script take place in the mansion, which was a real life mansion that he lived in and he used for the art and has a lot of these motifs. He also like did this string of shows in mansions across America and would invite a very select few people like that would sign up via email. He would invite you to the show. So you'd get an email inviting you to come hang with him at the mansion, just like all the parties in the narrative of the album. You would go there. They'd take your phone, so you couldn't record or do anything with it. They'd lock it up. So it was like one of the first things to do that. And then he would perform the whole album in the setting of the album, which is, I mean, performance art wise, like it's very fascinating to think about all these things. And again, it is that the valuation of the felt experience, which he then extended into like live shows, because the live show also told a different part of the story. And I count that as performance art because he's performing, and like the live show has an impact on the narrative, such as it gives you the boy's mom, like who's never heard in the script. She appears in the live show, like you hear her voice. She talks to the boy. She talks to Gambino, and we get all these different things. So like, yeah, the performance art aspect, because you had to live it, or because you now have to like go back and figure out what happened from web archives or the stuff that I write and stuff like that, like doesn't get talked about or is acknowledged as much. But I love to think about all those things. And to me, it comes across as like building humanity into our work and so a lot of the stuff we've been talking about.
That makes me think of one of the things I read that you had reflected on him doing, not just performances, him performing for an audience, but then actually somehow, whether it was through the app or whatever, but asking audiences to describe their feeling states. How do they describe, who are they bringing to the thing? So they're actually bringing their own subjectivity into the experience.
Absolutely. Thank you. I've almost forgot to mention. Yeah, there was an app with the show. So before he performs, when Stefan Ponce is DJing as the opening act, and also he's a character in the script. who's DJ Twerkules, and like, so you have that character or that real artist showing up as the opening act. But there was like an app, and it was basically like a message board on the stage, so people could talk to each other. So you have everybody in real life next to each other, but also because so much of our life is now on the web, everybody's also on the app. So he's bridging and oscillating between online community and real life community, and all those conversations that are going on. And then during his show, during his performance, there were different interactive points. Whether that be during Worldstar, when he says, hold your phone horizontal, he would always go find somebody whose phone was vertical, grab their phone, turn it horizontal, and like engage with them in that real way.
So that's a line in the song, hold your phone.
Yeah, he's like, hold it horizontal. Like for Worldstar, if you film it vertical, which most people do, you don't get as much visibility on a computer screen, right? And so he's like, man, hold it horizontal is a line. Yeah. So in the show, he would go turn somebody's phone. Now when people go to his shows, they know he's going to perform the song. They know he does that. I know people put the phone vertical on purpose because they want him to come to them, right? So there's a bunch of footage you can find online of like, Gambino took my phone and he turned it, because he does that. And there's also like moments in the show where he's like, how is this song making you feel? And everybody's like voting on the app and they're talking, and that's like overlaying his face is the bars of how people are feeling and things like that. So there's a lot of innovative stuff and a lot of like the interaction between audience and artists.
Cool. I've got one more kind of topic area that swings us back into the use of various identities. So on the topic of identity switching, it reminds me of the work of art history professor at UT Austin named Moyo Okediji, and he was one of the early theorists to use the term metamodernism. And he uses it in a specific way. He writes about and looks at the Yoruba diaspora and Black Atlantic cultures and the fusion of Black cultures with other cultures from around that area. So he's writing about this way that white culture is sometimes embraced and engaged and other times rejected. And that metamodernism is the term he uses to talk about this post-national subjects notion, that you're no longer, again, identified by a place or belonging in the same kind of, very linear way. And this was back in 1997. He's using this term metamodernism to talk about this concept of a lived reality of an artist who performs the identities of others. And some of those others might be configured as your enemy or someone totally different from you in different context. So they diasporate into these multiple selves, which sounds kind of postmodern in some ways, but he's really exploring, that the self exists on many levels, and that through the forms of creativity like performance, artists and other people, he also talks about people possessed by spirits. So we can journey through these, other selves and escape what he calls the modernist trappings of identity, becoming a quote unquote virtual nomad. So I think that Donald Glover would probably really appreciate some of this work and some of this way that metamodernism is inflected it through the artist and through the creative person, if you ever came in contact with it. So get in touch, Donald.
Yeah.
I gotta say, the one thing we haven't talked about that totally hits is what he did with the Pharos events, which were these. Oh, there was a weekend in Joshua Tree and a weekend in New Zealand, and the Joshua Tree one was when he basically released Awaken My Love, which was a total stylistic change and development evolution from BTI, because he's doing a lot more singing, and like there's like almost no rap on that album at all. And when he performed it, the people who went, because you weren't allowed a phone and the only recordings are the ones that his team has, that they like professionally recorded this, but they went to this dome in the middle of the desert, and he dressed up in like essentially like a tribal costume. So he's dressed up in this, and the way that I have, because I try to ask everybody who's been, who talks to me, like I'm like, hey, what did he do at this event? And the performance was described as he was possessed. He was acting out some of the events maybe of that album. He was dressed like he had face paint and all these different things that are not what you would have expected from him. He was also just like allowing the music, like invoking it a lot. Like he was making sounds that weren't human. Like he was doing lots of different things. And he's done this more popularly on the most recent album. There's a song where we don't think he's speaking English. Like it doesn't sound like any language we know, and he's like using that and he's channeling that. And so he is playing with these ideas of, what if I'm not of this world? What if I try and be somebody or express or perform this identity that is like, because he's expanding that, because we've seen him do all of these things, but he's expanding that even more, I think. And I think just some of these ideas connect with what you were talking about. Yeah.
Well, to me, that strikes me as metamodern in the sense that there's more permission to inhabit alternate realities and to admit to having, mystical experience, or to allow oneself to look like they're, kind of out there, either crazy or taken over or possessed or whatever. Not to say that other artists haven't, done things like that in other periods, but I think the metamodern period ushers in this acceptance, and maybe it's just part of the welcoming, the pluralism, the welcoming of various identities, and being able to play with various identities, that artists are now able to do stuff like that without getting trashed.
Yeah, I think it's distinct from the modernist and the postmodernist sensibilities, in that modernist sensibility wouldn't, on a scientific level, wouldn't allow for the supernatural stuff. And then the postmodern, they're not as, that mentality is not as fixed towards science, but postmodern would be suspicious that the person who's talking about supernatural, etc., experiences somehow being tricked or misled by capitalism or by media or something like that. So the postmodern kind of comes to the same prohibitive space that the modern does in relation to these kind of extraordinary experiences, whereas the metamodern allows for them because they're the person's experience.
Well said, Greg.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Two aspects of BTI that we haven't covered sort of relate to that. One is within the Zealots of Stockholm, in which Childish Gambino is saying that the internet is our new earth. And he's kind of talking in a kind of ontological way in some ways, that this new coding is a reworking of our actual humanity, and that it's a kind of it's compared to the Big Bang. The Big Bang of the internet's creation creates this filling of a void for the death of God. So there's this all-knowing, all-seeing symbol to worship. I think that was part of the Dissect episode. So we have that. Stockholm made me think of, when he uses Stockholm, like, is that as in Stockholm syndrome, that we've become captive to the internet, and we develop this weird love of it, an addiction to it, even though we know what it's doing to us, that we're captive to it.
Yeah, it's like a new world, right? And like it might outlive us. Like I think we have to start to reckon with that. But like, when we think about artificial intelligence, when we think about what we've created, what's going to live past human beings? I mean, if we do get there, I think we are getting there, but we're looking at, there's something else after us, and we've created a new god of whatever's coming after us. And like, and there's also like, he has an idea of the act of creating something is the act of God. And so in that way, human beings, as we create more, we are becoming God. There's tons of stuff to deal with that. There's also like in the story, if we want to talk about like metamodern specifically, and if we want to point out like an example that's related to this that might point to Donald directly addressing this, is that he uses the character of Rick Ross as the boy's father. So and Rick Ross is a rapper who is extremely postmodern, extremely forward with. He created a fake life through his art. Like was like, okay, if nothing matters and I can be anybody, then let me be this fake thing that I just made up, Rick Ross, because the guy's name is not Rick Ross, and he was like a correctional officer. But then he starts rapping about living on yachts and selling more cocaine than a mountain of snow or whatever. So he's totally postmodern, and that's the boy's father. And in Zealots of Stockholm, the boy's father has died, and the boy is a continuation of this thing. So it's like, what's after postmodern? Metamodern. We go from Rick Ross to the boy and Gambino. If Donald was thinking directly about these things, it seems to me to be a very clear indication of, hey guys, look, if you are thinking about these words, so am I. Is kind of what's coming across in those moments.
Yeah, I love that reading. I mean, it really works for me to see that Rick Ross was an exemplar of a postmodern way of being that's about fakery, and that he steps in with a, exemplification of realness and honesty and things like that, but not forgetting about it's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yep. And I think Donald you can see this in rap, because there was this initial, to rap you have to be authentic, and then Rick Ross, because you have to if you're going to rap about the streets, you have to be from the street, you have to rap about your real life experiences. And then Rick Ross was the development of, no you don't, I can rap about whatever I want. And then Donald's the next thing. So yeah.
All right, great. Well, maybe we should leave it there.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Greg. This was really nice. It was really nice to talk to you guys. It's nice that we have been able to do this too, because I know we've been connected on Twitter since a long time, like before Dissect, before any of this stuff.
Metamodern Cam.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So to be able to talk to you guys, like, this is really nice. I very much appreciated this. Thank you guys.
Speaking of Twitter, you have Metamodern Cam, at Metamodern Cam is your Twitter account. And you have a website, metamoderncam.com, correct?
Yes.
And we'll put all this in the show notes. And then,
wonderful.
And then our home website is whatismetamodern.com. And then also we would invite people to subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. Thanks.
And we also have a newsletter, and we also have, what else? We're sort of our own.
We have our own transmedia.
You've created your own world. Yes, wonderful.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, people can find it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Cam.
Thank you.